Welcome back to the second video in my series on what vehicle should I live in by, or which was the best vehicle to live in for full timing. So I wanted to start off, I mentioned in the first video in the intro that there's kind of a continuum when you think about vehicles to dwell in. On the one end is the really minimalist, simple and cheap options. On the other end is the more luxurious, spacious, and expensive options. So if you started off all the way on the one end of the continuum of simple and cheap, I guess technically you could say that would be not doing a vehicle, I'll be walking everywhere, carrying what you own in a backpack. There are people who do that. They travel, digital nomads, for example, or retirees. They might travel the world, and they just carry stuff in a backpack with them, and so they don't even bother with a vehicle. But this is about vehicles, so we'll skip over that. And then moving up from there, technically you could call a bicycle a vehicle. I've only met one person who actually lived off a bicycle but plenty of people do long distance touring or long distance travel on bikes, so that would technically be a possibility, and so would a motorcycle. But again, that's probably not going to be what most of you are thinking when you're watching a series on vehicle dwelling. So we'll start with passenger cars as the simplest, most minimal, least expensive vehicle dwelling option, and then we'll go up from there. So this one's going to cover passenger cars and the good, the bad of living in a passenger car full time. As far as the good, the first thing is probably that you already own a car, most likely. Most people own some kind of motor vehicle, so if you've already got a car, then that makes the whole process simple. You don't have to go out and buy anything or deal with that. You just have already got something. So that's one good thing about going for a car for vehicle dwelling. Passenger cars are also usually the easiest and least expensive options to buy as compared to vans and trucks and RVs. So you can, if you're on a tight budget and you need to buy something, that might be a reason to consider a passenger car. Fuel efficiency is another issue with passenger cars, especially the smaller ones. But even a lot of mid and full-size cars these days, you can get 30 or more than 30 miles a gallon. So that's a pretty big deal if you're on a tight budget or if you plan on traveling a lot. And a lot of nomads, for example, their first year or two on the road, they do a lot of miles, and then they kind of slow down and start spending more time in each places. So if you think that's going to be you and you're going to do a lot of miles, or if you're just on a really tight budget, the fuel efficiency in a decent passenger car might make it a tempting option for you. As far as stealth, that can be a good thing with passenger cars if you can get out of sight, and that's the key. If you're plainly visible when anybody walks by a car, obviously, you're plainly visible. But if you're able to get out of sight, either because you have windows tinted, curtains, whatever, or you have room to get in the back, and you can be out of sight, there's a stereotype that people don't live in cars, and those who do live in cars kind of look like they live in cars. So as long as you don't look homeless, you're not going to attract much attention to yourself, and so they can be good for stealth if you can get out of sight, but that can be a challenge. As far as maintenance goes on passenger cars, again, it's usually going to be easier and less expensive than what you're going to pay for on some of the commercial vehicles. So that can be another good thing about going with a car for vehicle dwelling. As far as the bad things about living in a car, the reasons you may not want to do it, space is an issue. You got real limited space in a car. Even in a full-size car, you've got limited space. That comes up for storage. You only have just so much room to carry things. And that's going to, your clothing, any tools you're carrying, food, any camp equipment you use at campgrounds. Everything you own basically is in the car. And you have very little storage. So you really have to be a minimalist to comfortably pull off living in a passenger car. Sleeping is an issue because of the limited space in many cars. Some are better than others, but it's something to think about if you're going to be able to pull off comfortably sleeping in your car or in a car that you buy. I've done it. It's possible. What a lot of people end up doing if they're doing a car long term is taking out some of the seats so that they can build in a platform for a bed. Sometimes you can get cars that'll have seats that'll fold pretty flat, and you don't have to start removing things. But that's not always the case. So something to be aware of, and to think about. You do have to be sure you can get a good night's sleep, both because you don't want to be going without a good night's sleep for a long time, but also because you don't want to be ending with back problems or joint problems because of being crammed into a car in an uncomfortable position all night. So that's not too cool. And hygiene can also be an issue in small cars. You need to, clean up and change your clothes and, use the bathroom. And sometimes you can do those things in a public restroom or in a campground facility or whatever. But sometimes you just need to do those things in your vehicle when you live in a vehicle full time. And that stuff can be a challenge in a car because it's so small and the roof is low. And so it's something to be aware of and think if you got a plan for that before you get started. As far as my recommendations, if you decide to go with a car or you're thinking about going that route, I've done it in a sedan and would not do it again if I could help it. If I had to do a car again or decided to do a car again for a period of time, I would definitely be looking at either a station wagon or a hatchback. The hatchbacks, generally the seats will fold down and you'll have a lot more room to stretch out and easier access to things that are in the back. When you're in a sedan, it's hard to get to stuff in the trunk. You have to get out and go around. I was in a Toyota Camry, a 2013 Camry for quite a while, and I'll tell you, I may do okay. It wasn't like terrible, but like I couldn't sleep in the back, for example. It had fold down rear seats, but it didn't fold flat. They folded to like a 30 or 35 degree angle, maybe. So you couldn't get flat. And then only about half the space to the trunk was open. The rest of it was closed off. So it's kind of a circular opening or an oval shaped opening in the middle. And it was low. If I tried to roll over when I was sleeping that way, I'd hit my hips on it. It was so narrow. And it's just, it wasn't really conducive to sleeping. I would have had to do a lot of work to modify that vehicle to put a bed in because I couldn't just fold the seats down and make a bed. So that's an issue in a lot of sedans, and it could be an issue with some wagons and hatchbacks too, depending on the design. But you got a lot better chance of finding something the seats are going to go flat on, or that you can remove the seats and have plenty of space. So you're probably going to want to go with a wagon or a hatchback if you're looking at living in a vehicle. The other big question is import versus domestic. You can find a used passenger car, a wagon or a hatchback that's an import at a pretty reasonable price, and it's going to get great gas mileage and pretty often be reliable. And so that's definitely something to think about there. On the other hand, the one thing about imports that I have run into personally that can be a challenge is if you're out in really rural, remote areas. Sometimes it's hard to find mechanics to work on them, and it's definitely can be hard to find parts for them, particularly if they're older at all. So if you're planning on spending a lot of time out in really remote areas, that might be a reason to consider going with a domestic vehicle that might be easier to find parts for. Otherwise, if you're looking to keep on a budget, it'd be hard to go wrong with a used Honda, Toyota, Nissan, whatever, hatchback or wagon. You can pick it up pretty cheap. You get great gas mileage. It'll probably last you a long time without too much maintenance. So, there's some good things about passenger cars. It's not the most comfortable. It's definitely on the one end of that continuum in terms of cost, but it's also going to be on that end of the continuum in terms of comfort and space and stuff. So it's not the most comfortable way to vehicle dwell, but I've done it. I know other people who have done it and make out okay. It can be done, and it is a way to get started. If you don't have anything, if you cannot afford to upgrade to something bigger right now, it's definitely a way to get started. So something to think about. Look for a hatchback or a wagon if you can at all. And, be cognizant of the overall condition of the vehicle because you don't want to be breaking down the road. So if you can, you'd be better off, in my opinion, with a good, reliable hatchback or wagon than with a van that was breaking down on you all the time. So I hope these thoughts on passenger cars help for you. I don't know that it's ideal. Like I said, I've done it. I would do it again if I had to. It wouldn't be my first choice. And a lot of the people I know who are in cars would still prefer to upgrade to something bigger. But there's exceptions to that. There's people I know who are living out of cars and they're perfectly happy with it and it works for them. So don't rule it out just because, everybody says you have to get a van or something. Try it out for yourself and see how it works. Maybe plan a weekend trip or go camp somewhere in a park or whatever just to try it out and see how it goes. Even sleep in your driveway for a few nights just to see how it works. And you can make, maybe you make some little arrangements and make it better for you and make it work out pretty good. But thanks for joining me for this video. The next video in the series, we're going to look at SUVs and why they may be a good or a bad choice for a full-time vehicle dwelling. So until then, we'll see you in the next video. Thanks, everybody.